the man in the silhouette. Interesting how we all assume it's a man, and that's because it probably is. Look, if One Piece was a standard harem isekai, then I think Shanks' large-chested sister would be the obvious answer, but this is not. It is One Piece. The rule of One Piece is that whenever we see a really cool silhouette, it's probably obscuring a really wacky character. However, the sword being held by this silhouetted individual is very familiar. A couple of commenters have suggested that the sword is actually Ace, which is Roger's old sword, as well as one of the 12 Supreme Grade blades. A sword that seems to have vanished into obscurity. We have absolutely no idea what Roger did with it after becoming the Pirate King. And it does look pretty similar, but you can tell the difference because the silhouetted individual has a flat guard, whereas the guard of Ace was a hemisphere shape. And also, Oda once drew Ace as a human, which I will never not bring up because I love this image. So Ace is out. However, it does pretty much perfectly match Shanks' sword Griffin, which has a flat guard, which is where all of the speculation about the mysterious figure being a Shanks relative comes from. There's really no more to it than that. When the tech spoilers first made their way to the internet, the leakers made it sound like this silhouetted figure was a carbon copy Shanks twin. And that could be how this turns out, but with what we see here, that isn't really the case. What I will say is that this sword also matches the blade that Ray Lee used during the God Valley incident, which is not the same sword that we see him using at any other point in the series. With my personal speculation being that that sword was Griffin and Ray Lee eventually gave it to Shanks, like how Roger gave Shanks the straw hat. But the Figurland connection continues, because Shanks' assumed relative Figurland Garling also uses a very similar, if not identical looking blade. So this one sword is evoking two Figurlands, and thus pointing us towards a potential third. However, this figure does seem to be much younger than Garling, hence why the Shanks evil twin theory has picked up some steam. I want to be clear, this idea is ridiculous and 99.9% not true, but it is a lot of fun. The idea is that the person who met the Elder Stars at Marijois was not Shanks. We can't actually confirm that it's Shanks because we don't see the side of his face that has the scar, and the cloak is obscuring his missing arm. The Elders also never refer to him by name or even his epithet. They don't say, redhead, but I don't like seeing you here. They're very careful not to identify this person. And you could take this either way, because that last panel is meant to be the big Shanks reveal, so you wouldn't include any indication of who he was before then, or it would ruin the surprise. But also, the Elders indicate that this man may be part of World Noble Society with this line. This is the Reverie. Given your standing, you should have nothing to do with politics. So, indulging the madness for a second, if this was a Shanks twin, then they would likely be a holy knight just like Garling. And that standing would mean that he would have nothing to do with politics. He isn't a legislator, he's law enforcement. And to cap off everything, this would mean that the certain pirate that fake Shanks wanted to talk about could very well be the real Shanks, who was the very last character we would have expected after seeing this panel for obvious reasons. That would be the ultimate subversion. The pirate that Shanks wanted to talk about turning out to be himself. And also him turning out not to be himself. Absolute Oda mind melt. My inclination is to believe that this person is going to be affiliated with the world government because the roster on the last 2 pages of the chapter are mostly packed with characters, good characters I should say, and or neutral characters, very adjacent good like say Buggy and Kuzan. And you know, the antagonists here, they feel a bit underpowered, so this silhouetted figure could be a secret weapon for them. Although the other major idea that people are bringing up is that this is the man marked by flames, or the burn scar man, depending on which translation you read. And this shot of the man is him getting his sword ready for all of the people he knows are coming after him after hearing Vegapunk's message. Thanks a lot for that, Applegrams. The reason why I'm not so on board with this idea is because I don't think the man marked by flames is a contender for the One Piece. From the almost nothing we know about him so far, he seems more like a caretaker. Someone guarding the final road poneglyph and waiting for the right person to claim its sweet, juicy history, as opposed to someone with their own agenda and reasons for actively wanting to obtain the One Piece, which I think everyone else on these last 2 pages has, even if we don't know about them yet. And by the way, this question about the silhouetted figure was submitted by a channel member, and if you'd like the chance to end up in a video about fictional pirates, then all you need to do is hit the join button below the video, which also supports our ability to fund our phenomenal channel artists and editors. Marco was smack dab in that page, so besides him remembering Whitebeard, I assumed it meant that Marco was also considered endangered. Alright, this question is missing context. So to be clear, this is the part where Vegapunk is talking about all of the special races, the ones that have been hunted down to near extinction. And in regards to Marco, I mean, obviously, he is the only member of the Pineapple Head tribe that we've encountered. And on top of that, Phoenix's mate, they tend to be exceedingly rare. And this is something I may have missed the first time around, although I think it has more to do with Whitebeard than Marco. Because during the section, again, Vegapunk is talking about the unique races, and that makes Marco think of Whitebeard, which adds a bit more fuel to the idea that Edward Newgate may have been a buccaneer, which I think makes a lot of sense when you look at images of him as a child, because he has that very Return to Bartholomew Kuma-esque physique, or at least part buccaneer, maybe a quarter. It would explain a lot. Although in this case, I do think the simpler answer is that Vegapunk's words reminded Marco of when Whitebeard told him about the former kingdom atop the red line inhabited by Lunarians, which then transitions into King's reaction. I find it odd that the final page of the chapter has all the Yonko, then related characters, but no commanders. But it shows Aokiji. I think it's hinting that he might betray Blackbeard. I think that just confirms what we all 99% knew, that Kuzan is a man with his own icy agenda. After failing to become a fleet admiral and seeing the direction the Marines were going in under the rulership of Sakazuki, I could believe that Kuzan's last-ditch thought was, well, the only way to fix this mess is to find the One Piece. Best to get going. And so he set out to do the impossible. But given that he was only one man, he needed to find an emperor to align himself with. Big Mom and Kaido probably weren't great options. One, because of their record, they've been emperors for God knows how long now and haven't made any progress. Plus, they're not the most reasonable of individuals, but Blackbeard, this Blackbeard, he is a very exciting entity, making waves in this world and genuinely pushing for the One Piece, despite only having been an emperor for less than 2 years. You also need to remember that Luffy wasn't an option at the time. He was still time skipping. I'm not sure why Kuzan wouldn't try Shanks though. That does feel like a more natural pairing, although it would be far less exciting narratively. But maybe Kuzan knows something about the will of D that led him to join the only emperor at the time who had a D in their name. Because the more you know about the D, the more you tend to see them as a safer bet than all the non-Ds, including Shanks. It's also worth mentioning Sabo. The commenter said that there were no commanders on this page, and that's kind of true, but not really. Sabo is the Revolutionary Army equivalent of a commander, but he also has his own thing going on at the moment, with people all around the world starting to idolize him as the Flame Emperor, thus giving him this weird sort of semi-fifth emperor status, because people are much more excited about him than they are of Dragon, for I think very reasonable reasons. And Sabo is kind of on the verge of stumbling into his own faction. That's one direction that Oda could take with him. For that to happen though, I imagine he'd need to have some sort of disagreement with Dragon, and I don't think there are any seeds of that at the moment. Sabo seems very, very loyal to the Revolutionary Army. And thinking about it, Garling also acts as a commander for Imu, so there's like 3 commanders on this page. Although it would be interesting to find out if Garling even knows about Imu, because most world nobles don't, and they've been looking to the 5 geriatrics for absolute authority. So what is the reaction of the Holy Knights going to be when they discover, it's an Imu? I was surprised by the lack of Supernova in the lineup for the race. A bit unfortunate for them. I'm not particularly surprised because we were told flat out that both the Kid and Heart Pirates were eradicated, although I feel like if this announcement had happened right after Wano, then both Kid and Law would have been included. However, I do think that this solidifies that they are now out of the race. They both still have important roles to play going forward, but they aren't candidates to claim the One Piece anymore. They're glorified FedEx agents delivering poneglyph rubbings to Shanks and Blackbeard. This chapter validates Katarina Devon's scene earlier. The other elders weren't there to see that Saturn was defeated and sent to the sea. So I think the suggestion here is that no one sees Saturn drown, which gives Katarina Devon an opportunity to rock up to the world government and pretend to be him. I doubt that Devon would be able to infiltrate the elders by pretending to be Saturn though. That would be such a risky game of high class Among Us, and she'd probably be figured out pretty quickly, especially if Devon isn't privy to their telepathy system. But even if Saint Saturn does die here, his art will return down the line in the form of Katarina Devon. Because if Saturn or indeed multiple Elder Stars die, then there is no way that the world government is reporting that. It would send the world into too much chaos and raise all sorts of unpleasant questions like, hey, why were the old men on that island in the first place? What was going on? And that makes Saturn a hell of a lot easier to impersonate, considering that 1, the real Saturn isn't around to object, and 2, no one else realizes that he's supposed to be dead. It would be an even bigger boss move if the other 5 elders got taken out as well, because then Katarina Devon could pretend to be the sole survivor with absolutely no one to call her out. It's just getting so ironic hearing insects from the mouth of a spider. So spiders aren't insects, but the general irony is still there. And what I love is if each of the 5 elders had a quirk of referring to humans as the thing that they themselves are. Like Saturn calls all humans insects despite being a spider, and then maybe Jupiter refers to humans as worms, disgusting wriggly worms. Topman Walkyrie could refer to everyone as swine. Marcus Mars considers them all to be poultry, and as for Ethan, I don't know. Maybe he has something against bald people or even bald horses specifically. Maybe that's his thing. It almost worked. The Five Elders have purposely made it impossible to locate the One Piece for many people, as you need to read the poneglyphs, but the Five Elders made sure to wipe out anybody who was truly capable of doing such a thing. So all of that is true, almost. Yeah, they missed a few people here and there. But my question is why they didn't seek out the One Piece for themselves. If claiming the One Piece allows someone to decide the direction of the world, then that sounds like a pretty worthwhile endeavor that we should at least, send a trusted strike force to look into, maybe the Holy Knights, and also maybe reconsidering our decision making, like say not murdering every single O'Haran scholar, so that you could instead use them to help you translate the ancient text, or at the very least not destroy all of their books, because some of those books are probably textbooks that could teach them how to translate the ancient text for themselves. It's your classic world government short-sightedness. Shoot first and think about dealing with ancient prophecies later. And I reckon if they'd been slightly less trigger happy, then they could have solved this whole One Piece mystery by now. Although with that in mind, I do wonder if Emu is actually capable of reading the ancient text, if indeed he has been around since ancient times. In that case, a strict genocidal policy would be a good move, because it would leave him as the sole individual able to decipher them. Though it still doesn't explain why he hasn't, tried to. And if the world government are joining this race, then they're gonna need someone who can read the poneglyphs. Luffy has a Robin, Blackbeard has a Pudding. Shanks has a good sense of direction and probably already knows where Laugh Tale is because Roger already went there. So the world government are going to be very behind without that ability. Isn't it a bit weird that Oda showed us Vivi, Shirahoshi, and the two Skypian girls when talking about the weapons? The young one was gifted with mantra after all. I don't think it's weird at all, and I don't think you do either. It made perfect sense because this is when Vegapunk was talking about the ancient weapons, and so he showed major ancient weapon characters. However, that could mean that there's a bit more to Isa that shouldn't be underestimated. Because thinking about it, Isa is kind of like the OG Momonosuke. Momo was this fated child able to hear the voice of all things for reasons. And Isa was also exactly that before mantra was revealed to be observation haki. And Isa was just born different because she's genuinely in the top 10 observation haki users probably in the world. But there really could be something more going on here. In Isa's Viviacard databook entry, it was noted that her observation haki allowed her to, quote, hear the voice of everyone from all over the island. Those are very specific words and aren't used with any other haki user, and it could be hinting that Isa is actually using the voice of all things, and we just mistake it for observation haki because they do similar things. With the voice of all things being a naturally gifted power, unlike observation haki, which in every other case we've seen has had to be trained. Please do not forget about the wonderful color spread for the 27th anniversary of the manga. I hadn't actually considered that this was the chapter that was released on the 27th anniversary of One Piece. And as a thanks for reading, Oda gave the fan base a giant Nami to simp over because giant women are very much in fashion right now on the internet, which I attribute to Lady D from Resident Evil Village. I really like it though because this style, it's much messier than most color spreads, as in the coloring in particular is much more raw and splotchy than usual. Like this jagged line you see running down Nami's leg isn't usually what Oda would go for. He tends to prefer clean, slightly flatter and more seamlessly blended color. So I do really like this spread stylistically. I always enjoy being able to see little hints of the instrument of the artist. I just hope that it's an aesthetic choice and not an issue caused by Oda's ongoing health concerns, and that perhaps coloring in his regular style might have been too intensive for him. But I do find it funny because the most detailed part of this color spread is definitely this area. Oda spent a lot of time perfecting the contours of Nami's breast and even did a nice blend into that classic anime skin shine. And comparing that coloring to the rest of her body, you can just tell that Oda spent quite a bit of time here. And why not? Nami has always been Oda's priority. That's why he married a Nami cosplayer. I want Luffy to be able to use his powers without limits towards the end. Do you think that will happen? I think that's where we are heading with Endgame Luffy. Right now, Gear 5th does still have some restrictions, although they're more minor annoyances than anything. It's like an ability with a cooldown. Luffy can't endlessly spam it, there are forced breaks, and eating food can make the cooldown shorter. Then again, it is still possible that Luffy has already achieved his peak. He did say so himself on Wano. Peak freedom, something. However, this is a shonen manga, and traditional shonen rules state that we would need one more big power-up to overcome the finalist of villains. But Egghead has also showed us that part of Luffy's abilities has to do with liberating others and allowing them to fight as freely as him, which is seen in a very literal sense with Bonnie adopting Gear 5th. But our big push towards the end is about Luffy liberating the world. So it might be less that he finds another new way to fight without limits, but more that he's able to spread that power to others. Not necessarily by making everyone transform into white-haired sun gods, but by breaking that mental barrier that stops them hitting their full potential. You probably have some mental barrier going on right now now. And you know what I say? I say stop it. Do the thing you want to do right now. Because this is the end of the video, and look, I'd appreciate it if the thing you wanted to do was subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.